Hello, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to speak to you. What I'm going to do is to present the joint project of the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and the Herzog August Bibliothek. I'm afraid I maybe disappoint you in this presentation because what I'm going to say is neither exciting nor new, presumably, but may demonstrate, show how data modeling is set to work in an actual project out of the humanities. The project I'm talking about is a project in a series of projects. It started already in 2002, so this might explain what I'm going to say later on as to the standards we adopted. Nonetheless, it got funding in 2009 till 2012 and will be finished by the end of this year. Before discussing modeling aspects, I'd like to briefly familiarize you with the project and its objectives, early modern emblems or emblem books. Just some people involved: Mara Wade as a principal investigator, and the goals. By the end of this year, 100 emblem books will be digitized. Emblem books is a genre of becoming popular in the 16th and 17th century. We will transcribe more than 15,000 mottos, and about 10,000 pictorial will be indexed in this project by icon class notations. We plan to create, of course, a joint portal for emblem research. This is the starting point of emblem book production. The first emblem book is said to be by Alciato, Alciato's Emblematum Liber, which appeared in 1531 and became extremely popular in the following years. This is why some call this century an emblematic one. So, what is an emblem? The first time I traveled to the States, I was invited to a workshop addressing issues of digital emblematics at the University of Illinois. At the customs in Chicago, when interrogated what I'm planning to do in the States, a custom officer actually asked me this very question. Apparently he had no clear idea what an emblem book is like and probably classified emblems as rather suspicious. Otherwise, he wouldn't have spent a total of 15 minutes for the interrogation, even though there was a very long queue waiting. So 3 planes coming in that time from Europe, and they waiting for my explanation. So I did my very best, but without much success. Eventually, I ended up by calling it a sort of ancient Edward. This seemed to have satisfied him, and I was allowed to pass. Afterwards, I wondered if this really is a good description, and to some extent it is, because there is a picture and text somehow riddling and playing on the content of the message so as to make it more attractive and convincing, to sell the story, so to speak. Ideally, an emblem consists of 3 parts: a motto, a picture, and an epigram or subscription. Sometimes a book contains sophisticated compositions of emblems. As book genre, it was international and multilingual, including several translations such as Latin, German, Dutch, French, or Italian. Quite often, the components of an emblem are scattered all over the book and must be collected and recombined by the reader to make sense at all. But not only are the textual parts challenging for data modeling, but also the pictures. Here you see a series of descriptions relating to one engraving, once again consisting of various emblems. Obviously, there are at least two different structures involved. First, the book structure or page sequence. Second, the emblem structure consisting of motto, picture, and epigram. Both of them are important for the encoding and refer to different entities, the book and the emblem. I confine myself to emblems in book, though of course there are other appearances of emblems, such as church ceilings, maiolica, porcelain, paintings, architecture, and so forth. All or some of these may be intricately interconnected and dependent on one another, leading to specific modeling problems, but I'll put this aside for the moment. At the beginning in 2002, we had to face two major problems. There was no emblem standard ready at hand, and the questions of identification demanded a solution. I'll come to the latter later. The problem of which standard is to be applied presumably arises in every modeling process. Is it better to adopt a given modeling scheme, ontology, or standard, or create a new one? Although the first is certainly preferable, it might in some cases worthwhile considering if a new one is not more appropriate for the material and easier to implement. In the case of emblematics, we decided to create a new one, basing on a descriptive model Stephen Rawls from the University of Glasgow once put together, and which is called the so-called spine of information. This decision may be debatable, but it worked fine. Implementing and sharing data turned out to be comparably easy, according to the emblem namespace, as we called it. I don't want to get into much detail here, but just show you or give you an impression of how existing standards such as a TI header or mods are included and how the emblem schema looks like. Here's the view of the oxygen. You can either use the TI header for bibliographic descriptions, but later on we turned to mods as this is more popular in libraries. Certainly you can include other standards if this is preferable. Here is the construction of the components of an emblem. And here you have a view on an XML representation of the emblem, consisting of motto, transcription, the various translations of the transcription, the picturia, and the icon class notations included in the schema. And now, the other structure, the book structure, as it is embedded in a structural description of the book. By the way, this structural description is a sort of proto-standoff markup, so we thought it up at 2000, so at a very early time, and we considered it a good idea to encode the structure in a way that we think of a complete text but leaving out the text. This is nothing else than a prototype of standoff markup, I think, except for the identification of the relation to the text, which caused us some problems. As already mentioned, one crucial issue in all scholarly work is identification, in that it provides the basis for quoting, referencing, and in digital environment, linking resources. How can we secure unique identification across various layers and entities involved. Here we can take, again, advantage of the Forber model, even if it is discredited somehow in this conference. I still dare using it. We can use these levels to characterize and describe the particular modeling problems we had and still have. All of the 4 levels may be identifiable. Identifiers may be attached to them. What we deal with at the moment in this project is just the edition and the copy level. And we are desperately looking for a work identifier and work level description possibility. Typical identifiers of the edition level in traditional humanities are bibliographic numbers, be they in an emblematic bibliography such as Landwehr or in a National Union catalog. What we were missing in this project was an URI-based reference scheme. So some of the Union catalogs in Germany, and I think in the States as well, offer persistent identifiers for bibliographic records. However, except for some bibliographies, such as the VD17, which is a database for imprints of the 17th century, there is still no national unique identifier for an edition, let alone a global one. What we were able to provide in the project are globally unique URIs of the copies, or to be more precise, of the emblems therein. Accordingly, two identifiers were assigned to 2 copies of the same edition. Identical emblems from different copies received different identifiers. To ensure uniqueness, we made use of a handle service at the University of Illinois. You have a screenshot of this handle service, and here you can ask for a URI for your emblem you are describing. We are aware that this can only be considered a first step. Further research, and this is really research at that stage, has to be done in order to link the various identical emblems together. So we might have identical emblems scattered all over the copies we have, and you have to bring them together via maybe all same as labels or indicators. We hope that this will eventually lead to getting an emblem work identifier. This is the overall goal. Goal is to put together all the emblems we have identified by identifiers and identify the emblem at the work level. Let me close with some slides relatively relating to the presentation of the emblem books we have. First, the book with the book structure in Wolfenbüttel. This is a slide which refers to a prototype of our database, so you are the first one who can see this. So please have a check maybe a week or so. I don't know whether it's functional at the moment. Where we try to provide access to the different levels of an emblem. So here you can search books and emblems, books only, search emblems only, or browse by icon class notations. Here is the emblem level access page where you can select emblems, look for details, mottos, and the force, and the picture level access. where you can search for icon class headings. And what is, I think, interesting is the icon class browsing view, where you can make use of the icon class notations independent of languages used. So the icon class browser allows you to search in English, in French, in German, in Swedish, in Finnish, Italian, of course. So this is a very comfortable way of doing research on pictures. Here's the same browser provided by archives via IFrame, so you can link it to your own page by IFrame. We provide an OII interface for delivering the emblem schema or the book level metadata. We implemented also an OII interface, not for the public, but for internal reasons, so that Foto Marburg, who is a partner in the project, and Archives, who's the other partner in the project, were able to harvest our data. They enriched our data. All of this happened on the emblems schema. We provided for that. And we harvested the data back, the enriched data back into our database. So it's a nice way to collaborate in a digital environment. I leave with the issues of modeling. Thank you very much.
I thought this was really interesting that you refer to Ferber as an authority, and yet the project completely explodes the Ferber by virtue of the fact that working with a genre which, by definition, the definition of work, the traditional definition of work within Ferber sort of dissolves in this commingling of different emblem books and the way the different emblem books will replicate the same emblem with variations, and you know, how you define what a single emblem actually is extremely problematic and interesting. Obviously, you've had to grapple with that head on. So icon class is the location for an identifier for a particular emblem defined as an emblem. So that, for example, if you have an emblem for faith, depicted in various different forms and different editions of different emblem books, even if it's not exactly the same picture, or maybe it's somewhat changed, or the motto is a little different, or the subscription is completely different, you can still say this is a faith emblem, and that has an identity across that, correct?
Exactly, yeah. So the icon class is a thesaurus of iconography. So they index concepts. They try to index concepts. Maybe Max can explain better as an art historian. It's very powerful to some extent. You can't do everything with that, but it works fairly well with the emblems and maybe Baroque paintings. So you can look for Jesus cross. What's the meaning of a particular depiction? This turned out very efficient in a multilingual context. As to your first question, this is a very difficult question, and in a way we put that aside in arguing we just identify every emblem by a unique identifier in every copy.
Right.
So the next,
yes,
and we are aware that there are multiple appearances of the same emblem in various copies. The next step is the step of doing research on this, because you have to compare the one copy with the other copy and say, this identification is identical with that identification. That's research.
Right.
And we can't afford doing that in that project we have here.
But you see, in effect, what Alan suggested with Ferber is that we we can relax some of the problems that we experience with the Ferber mapping into domains other than the classical bibliographic domain if we, instead of talking about manifestations and expressions, that we simply talk about a symbol structure level, which then can be represented by another symbol structure level where work remains at the top, and then we have copy down at the bottom. Or what's the term for the bottom line? Item. So in effect, I think what this is suggesting is that you need to have that recursion also at the top, because work is not where it stops. You continue to go up, right? Because you have this Dutch printer who's printed emblem books for 30 years during a period, but his emblem books have some of the same emblems as that guy over there in France, and yet they have variations. So
So what is the work then?
Right.
This approach also recapitulates the Speronius suggestion that we start from the bottom and then derive similarities as we can through research, as you say.
May I just a good example for the problem we have here for the notion of work is maybe the tradition of Petrus Lombardus. This manuscript tradition is very sophisticated, and most researchers say there isn't a starting text, so to speak, but every century added his own or created his own Petrus Lombardus. Yeah? So what actually is the work? This is very hard to say. On the other hand, all of these are called Petrus Lombardus. No? So it may turn out being something like that they belong together and having the same name without being the same. Yeah?
I have two remarks. One is very practical, and the other one is very, very conceptual. The first thing, I think this is awesome to do exactly that, right? So to identify the instances. And both the practical remark and the conceptual are based on this thing that images and art history in general doesn't know a thing like any bounds, right? So there is no thing where you could say, okay, these are the instances, they're a copy of the same kind of concept, which is work, right? So there is no one node you could say same as. So even if you take completely identical ones and you would link them up with same as ones, that's very dangerous. That's a practical remark because you end up with n times n minus 1 links. So 20 instances would be 380 links, right? So that's what you even know how to do it by machine. And especially if you want to change something, right? You have to change all these instances, which is horrible. And the other thing is, it's very likely that there will be a couple, which are always the ones which are used as examples, which are actually identical, and you can say, okay, this is really the repetition of this one model. But if you look at like this lobster plus globe thing, right, there will be passages where this co-appears with other things, where there is allusions to that, right? And that's exactly the case. I think we have to do scholarship, and the scholarship not only involves writing text and have a series of figures, it also involves maybe to say, okay, here we really have one node where we can say that's the type, which actually convert terms, which we're talking about, and then there's other things where you say, okay, this is really a cloud, it's a network of things which overlap, and the structure of the network will be very, very interesting. And the other thing is, icon class is really very subjective. So if we say lobster or globe, it's okay. But is that thing an equator going over? Is it a CDI? Is it whatever, right? So there will be, you learn more about the curators by looking at icon class classifications than actually
I fully agree, Icon-class has its deficiencies. I see that, but it's, again, in view of that, it's still a good tool to use here, yeah? So I'm not talking about the principal reliability of Icon-class for describing that sort of objects, but it's a very practical and good tool to find these objects at all, because otherwise we had no chance to get to them, yeah? So this is a sort of discussion I used to have with art historians, because every art historian tells me icon class is awful. Yeah, yeah, and it's true. Yeah, sure. Yeah, and I ask him, what shall I do? Yeah, and I said, I've got a new system. Yeah, my system.
Well,
yeah,
I think anxiety comes from the implicit identification of icon class with this super work thing, which doesn't hold.
Yeah, I fully agree. This is indeed, we have to distinguish between the magic of the idea of being implied in here and a complete practical approach of getting to the things. What we offer here are, in the first place, identifiers. Identifiers of pieces you can put together. What the reason is of, or the reasoning behind this putting together is another question. Yeah? And people like Henkel Schöne, who put together these various emblems in one book, did exactly that, because they compared the emblems, identified it from the books, they found it, and compiled it. So, and this is an advantage. This is debatable in another angle, but if you have identifiers to refer this is that and this is that, and then you can maybe split and say it's not same as, it's something else, it's similar as. Yeah? Then you can build a new ontology on this sort of judgments, I think. What we are providing is just a basis for doing research on emblem books. Yeah?
Could you put the URL again up so that we can
Oh, yes.
view for the interface?
I hope you're going to talk about picture criticism.
Well, no, I can't. I really wanted to talk about icon class because I used to work on the William Blake archive many years ago, and we had to do, we had exactly the problem was we had to figure out how to mark up images and how to mark up the content in images. And we ended up developing our own proprietary system. And in retrospect, we could have very easily used icon class. And I don't entirely know why we rejected it, because we were aware of it. I think part of the problem is that it's interesting that you say art historians always say they hate it, because of course it was developed by an art historian, it was designed by an art historian. Yeah, yeah. And I think one of the problems is that it's proprietary. I think theoretically, don't you have to pay to use?
No, it's free since about 2 or 3 years. It's free.
Okay, okay.
The person in charge is Hans Brandhorst. So if you're interested in it, get in touch. You can enhance it, improve it. So every suggestion is very welcome there.
Okay, that's good to know.
So we got in touch with the icon class people themselves. So this was one of my concerns, that this is proprietary, that we have to pay for that. That if we get online with this business, that we have to,
you have no audience, right? Yeah.
Look for our credit cards.
Yeah. So one thing that's always intriguing about icon class is a feature that is widely underused, and in fact, I know of no instance of it being used in a project. And that is that it makes provisions for expressing relational information between the different components or parts of an image. They actually, you can use the colon sign. So it can be used very denotatively. You can say, if you've got a shepherd holding a flute, then you can, code for shepherd, use the colon, and then code for flute, and is expressing that the flute is being essentially, there's some relationship between those things. It doesn't really express the nature of that relationship, but it does connect the two. But one of the ways in which the manual suggests that it might be used is to express more kind of metaphoric or interpretive information. So I think this is relevant because in a number of the discussions we've thought about, how can you have the affective triples or contradictory markup and so forth. And so you can, I always thought that this would have enormous application in the Blake archive because Blake uses so many visual puns. So you might use a snake as the wheel of a chariot, or snakes to represent horns on an animal. And you can see using an index, the icon class system to allow you to search, for example, all ways in which snake was being used metaphorically. So your source domain is something. I mean, you would basically set it up as source domain and target domain separated by the colon, so that you could always search across just one particular target domain, what was being used as a source domain in your metaphoric expression. And do you know of any instance of anyone making use of that feature of icon class?
Well, Hans Brandhorst did, yes. And he told me once, but I can't remember the project where he was involved in. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Anyways,
but
it's a really
right.
interesting system. And I actually had known about this project for a number of years.
I have a question. I'm going to jump the queue for a second and ask the question I wish Carrie would ask, which has to do with the nature of identicalness between images. And I understand that it seems like a question that you're asking researchers to make up their minds about, but I wonder, have you already different kinds of identity or different degrees of identity between images, like yes, printed from the same plate, or printed from a revision of the plate, or printed from a re-engraving of the plate, or inspired by, or allusion to?
Well, I'm afraid the modeling hasn't reached that state yet, but actually next week I will be get in touch with the people to think about exactly that, because it makes much sense. Now we got the basis for doing research to do the research. And part of this next project we're going to apply, we ask money for, should be to develop such an model for describing certainty of assigning identity between entities. I think there are some precursors, so to speak, one can make use of. You know, the old model offers some. There are other data models available where you have to look at what possibilities they may offer.
I think so. It was polemic that I said that active class is awful, right? But there's an obvious spectrum, right? There's very useful uses like this one, where it makes sense to use it, because classification is better than no classification, and having a system is better than having no system.
Absolutely.
Right? But in the same time, there is this kind of idiosyncrasy thing, right? So you could say, okay, we agree an icon class can depict everything, and it's not subjective, right? But in the end, everybody has a subjective idea about icon class and how to use it, right? And then if you measure the use, you find out that very little of it is actually really used, right? And it's perfectly legitimate to just say, okay, let's count the plants, and let's say ivy, Laura, or whatever, without using icon class, using Twitter hashtags, right? Coming up with your own. Result will be different, but also useful. On the other end of the spectrum, there's artists and art historians. I know one particular case, Chris Stäcker, who was the curator of the Boymans von Beuningen and then Haus der Kunst in Munich. He once said to me, everything I do in my career is to disprove icon class.
It's very encouraging.
Okay, focus, let's go.
You described how you think of the requirements, the list of requirements for your data model. Did you, going back to something Carrie said before, did you talk to the researchers or do any tests or whatever, or did you just say, I have a rather clear understanding what emblems are, or I'm part of a community who knows what emblems are, we're trying to reconstruct?
Well, there is a community, and there was a very vivid discussion about the components of emblems and what we're going to describe and make it feasible, so to speak. And I mentioned already Stephen Rawls, who is the father of this spine of information, and this, at least we only translated this description of what an emblem is about into an XML in a schema. So we try to adopt an opinion of a particular group of researchers in a data model.
Can you also already say whether this opinion of what the thing is of this community is somehow related to what they're really doing with on research with the data?
Yes, there's a very it's a wonderful project in Glasgow, digitization project on emblems, and this is the context where this model was developed as a descriptive model, of course. They didn't use a schema. The need for a schema turned up when we tried to share data. So before that, it was an isolated project. It was a description of what's going on, and but the further discussion in this group showed that we need something to rely upon in a technical way. So we created a schema, and this was the basis for all further work with the service providers. So we sent this to Icon Class. Archives is Icon Class, so to speak, as Hans Brandhaus is the owner of this company, Archives, and he's at the same time running Icon Class, so to speak. And these people are really good in indexing icon class. So we said, you should do that. I have no idea of that. You should do that. But we need some sort of communication protocol. And here comes the emblem schema into play. But it relies, of course, it relies on a descriptive model the community gave us. And there was some discussion at that, of course, because I had to adopt something, or do you need this really, and that sort of thing. Thank you.